I want to talk about the discussions that aren't worth having and the weird joy it can bring you when you get into that situation and you realize that you don't need to, I guess, defend what you feel or believe in a spiritual context. Now, granted, within this year 2020, I understand there are many times where certain conversations need to be had, they need to be hashed out. Please do, as long as you're safe. Go forth, have the discussions. Let's get to some of the reasons why we believe the things that we do, correct? But there are definitely times when conversations aren't worth having, aren't needed, or you recognize that possibly you are the only person in the room with an opinion. And therefore you might get horribly ganged up upon, you might, just rub everyone the wrong way, maybe create a very tense vibe that just doesn't need to be there. We all know there's a difference, right? There's a difference between, oh, I need to say something here, and then maybe you go back and you didn't, and you feel a little guilty for it. You should have called that person out. You should have said something. You should have said, actually, I don't believe that. I don't agree with you. But sometimes that silent disagreement is perfectly acceptable, and some things don't need to really get hashed out in a moment. And there's been a couple of moments with that with my really close friend groups as of recently that I find actually very empowering to remain quiet about it. Now, these are friend groups that I very much treasure. They're really close to me. Some know about my witchcraft, some don't. But recently in both groups, at separate occasions, there have been times where something about the spirituality has been brought up, whether it's astrology or what happens to us after we die, that consciousness, they believe consciousness just dissipates. Some of them call themselves agnostic, but the more they speak, it's more of like agnostic, leaning very much on the atheist side of things. You know what I mean? Like, they don't speak of a, I don't really know. They speak more of a, I'm pretty certain we just turn into nothing, but I'm open to being wrong. Seems to be a majority of their established thinking. And I find this fascinating in so many ways because when they start talking about it, it's interesting to me how passionate they get, how you can tell it brings them a lot of peace. It just settles their mind with the idea of that, yeah, there's always a logical explanation, it's always proven, and even if there is no consciousness, we get recycled into something else. And they always do the caveat, always. They go, no one really freaking knows, which I always very much appreciate. But in the recent times that those conversations have been coming up, I have instead remained very, very quiet. I nod along and I go, oh, that's so great that you find that so empowering for you. Like, I acknowledge I'm a part of the conversation, and that's about it. I don't know, for the longest time, especially at the beginning of my craft, I felt that I needed to speak up. Right? I needed to say something. I needed to give at least little objections at certain instances, especially with people who were close to me that I knew, wouldn't put me in any sort of danger. But even the conversations I felt like might risk my job or risk something else, I almost felt the need to speak up, and if I didn't, I felt extremely guilty for it. But I think also part of that came from, I guess, a lack of trust in my own stuff, I hate that whole concept that if you vehemently disagree with a thing, like if you come out so passionate, it's because some part of it hit home. Some part of it is you recognize that it is true. Like, there's part of you that believes what they've said, that kind of concept. Sometimes I think that could be true, and clearly very much the beginning of my path that was the case. I was still in a lot of doubt and exploring and very protective because it mattered so much to me that it was valid, and if it was recognized as valid by others, then I got very defensive with my spirituality and witchcraft in general. But I don't always think that sometimes a passionate response is necessarily that something you believe what that person says to be true. It's more of that there is something it creates a friction, it creates an energy, right? And what I noticed about these conversations where I was suddenly silent is I realized there wasn't any friction. They got to believe entirely what they believed, and it wasn't out of any sort of judgment upon what others do or resonate with, right? It was very clear that this was them just talking about what empowered them. With that, made me realize that, I could just hold space and let them talk about what empowers them, what brings them peace, what settles their mind, what has really worked well for them. And I didn't have to come in with my objections like, well, this is what worked well for me, or I don't agree with that. There was no need for that in that time and moment. And it was a very interesting feeling to be like, yeah, no, I do my thing, they do their thing, and I can listen to them and what empowers them, even though I vehemently disagree with quite a bit of it. I don't think our consciousness just disappears or recycles into other energies and that who we are disappears. I just don't. That brings off to me for some reason. Like, I feel like it's part of it, but maybe not the whole picture, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like there's some other unknown out there. But my disagreement didn't come with this highly emotional negative reaction. I don't know, I guess I just didn't feel defensive, if it really comes down to it. It was clearly, I was in a space of understanding and actual open-minded conversation, and the conversation at the time was just geared towards this topic, and that was that. And I don't know, it was a very new experience for me. I normally, if I'm in those type of situations, some sort of discomfort always comes up. And it happened twice, like so close, where I was just like, yeah. And maybe it really is just that I'm finally truly comfortable in my own craft. That it took a while for me to realize, well, yeah, no, I really don't need outside validation. I really don't need to worry whether or not someone 100% agrees with me or disagrees with me or sees me as silly or invalid in any way. Their validation, I guess, just doesn't matter. It's just kind of nice to see people expressing themselves with joy over how they think the universe works and how it works best for them to bring them a better life. And for me, I have that as well. And us stating an affirmative for one thing isn't necessarily stating a negative for another, if that makes sense, right? I think a lot of times I have taken it personally, and I've seen others taking it personally, when someone just emphatically agrees with one thing that works for them, right? They'll say, oh, well, I do life this way. And by them saying they agree with the thing, just because it's a little bit different than how someone else does it, the person who doesn't do that feels it's judgment on them for not doing life that way. When there was no speaking that anything outside of what that person did being wrong. It was just that, well, no, this specific thing actually really works well for me. And I've been that negative person, that person who's like, oh, well, if you're saying a thing that is not what I do, then you must be in disagreement with what I do, which is not necessarily the truth. But anyway, I just found those conversations to be very interesting, and I wonder if you guys have had similar situations. And how did you find it was from a place of being less defensive about your own spiritual path and your craft? Or has that not come up for you? Do you kind of avoid those more intense conversations about things like religion because they really don't go anywhere and it's fine? All that stuff in the comments down below. And I will see you guys next week. Bye bye.